Dr. Carson Roberts has 10 reasons why you should stop making hay. Among them,
and if we are not returning carbon to the soil, those bugs, those soil microbes don't have anything to eat, and so there will become less of them. And those soil microbes are the ones that are mineralizing nutrients inside the soil. They're helping the plant grow. They're improving aggregation. Just a whole number of things.
but we're not just going to talk about his 10 reasons. We're also going to get practical as well.
And this may catch you off guard. I'd say the number one thing that you should do when you go to pick up the hay, give them a good check that's cashable and give them a smile and a handshake. That person is going to remember you because you're a rare beast. Next year, when you show up to buy hay, they're going to put you first in line.
All that and more on this episode 469 of the Working Cows podcast, brought to you by Understanding Ag.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Howdy, everybody. It's Clay Connery, host of the Working Cows podcast, recorded exclusively in the Understanding Ag studios. Very excited to be joined today by Dr. Carson Roberts. He recently wrote an article about 10 reasons why you should stop making hay. And we're going to talk to him about that. That conversation has been discussed at other places as well. So we're going to try and take a different angle and get practical. What do you do? How do you do it? What do you do instead? How do you make sure that you don't have to feed hay or as much hay? And how do you even go about acquiring the hay that you might have to feed? So we're going to try and be immensely practical today. So look forward to this conversation, and we'll share that with you right after a word from our sponsor today, Understanding Ag. As farmers and ranchers, we've all heard pitches from ag consultants about the next great new product that will increase our yields, pounds, or animal performance. And each of those silver bullets comes with a price tag that you pay year after year, taking more money out of your pockets and putting it into someone else's. Our friends at Understanding Ag aren't out to sell you anything but the knowledge to grow healthier soils, plants, animals, and profits. Their goal is to help you become your own best manager, a short-term client, but a long-term friend and partner on the road to regeneration. If you're still waiting for that next year that's going to be better, maybe it's time you give Understanding Ag a call. Check them out at understandingag.com. I know you'll be glad you did. Carson, thanks for joining me today on the Working Cows podcast.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Yeah, I really appreciated your article and your appearance on the Working Ranch radio show. We'll have links to both of those things in the show notes page for today. People can go check that out. Was very practical. You know, the article for sure was very practical, and appreciated kind of what you had to say there. And so I do want to spend just a little time kind of reviewing your case to maybe your case against haymaking, I guess, and then we'll talk about maybe some of the pushback that you've gotten, and then I'd like to get practical on some steps to stop making hay. Kind of there's your outline for the episode. So let's start out with kind of a review of the article itself, and then we'll talk about some of the pushback.
Okay, sounds great. Yeah, so I guess this all started when one of our county extension agents wrote an article about consider the cost of making hay, and one of our media people on campus reached out to me and she said, "Hey, would you mind reviewing this and maybe adding some additional insight?" And I said, "Sure, I have some opinions about making hay, and I could definitely share those." And so that's when I came up with those 10 reasons, and it really wasn't that hard to do, and I could have added a few more, but that was where it started, and the funny thing to me was that it seems like it's something that people had never heard of before, and that totally blew my mind because I thought that line of thought was very mainstream, but turns out it's not.
That line of thought to me got its start in Missouri, right?
Oh yeah, it
I
certainly
mean,
did.
kick the hay habit. I think that was, I don't know if Jim Garish was still on staff there when he wrote that or not, but he was involved in University of Missouri Extension, as I remember it. Is that right?
Right. So Jim wrote that book, I believe, after he left. I believe he wrote it in 2003, and he left here in 2002.
Okay.
And so I guess just for context, I work at the Forge Systems Research Center in Linneus, Missouri. So essentially, I am basically in the same role, in the same situation that Jim Garish was 25 years ago. So, a few things have changed, but a lot of things have remained the same in the cattle industry. And so oftentimes we come to the same conclusions on some things. And I guess Jim Garish kind of turned me on to this thinking. Bert Teichert quite a bit too. But, after reading Kick the Hay Habit, that kind of helped me align some of my thinking. And so if you're thinking about going down this path, Kick the Hay Habit is a great place to get started. Read that book. It's far more in depth. Basically, what I've done is I just took a look at it and thought about the things that have changed since then and added those in there because it's been 25 years since that book was written.
Right, but he was having some of these same conversations, doing some of the same work that you're doing with producers on the ground in Missouri in the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s. He was doing a lot of that same work, trying to expose people to different ways of doing things and taking these opportunities, right? I mean, it's it's still pushing that same rock up the hill, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, just to the core of the article itself, you have 10 reasons, and number one on the list is skyrocketing equipment costs, and I mean that couldn't be more stark, right?
Yeah, and you don't have to go very far to get agreement on that particular case because haying equipment and crop tractors have gone up drastically in value, especially over the past 5 years, and so you can certainly make a case that those pieces of equipment have increased a lot in value over the past few years. But what I did when thinking about this, what I've done in thinking about this is comparing it to the value of a calf, and I think that gets you a little further down the road because cattle are your currency when you're in the beef beef producing industry. And so when you're figuring out how much a tractor is worth, look at it in terms of how many cows it's going to take to pay for that piece of equipment, because that is your currency. And so when I did that, looking at it, over the past 50 years, we've seen a huge increase, not only in the cost of the equipment, but when you factor in inflation, even in the high cattle market prices today, if you compare this to, let's say, 1973, which is a pretty common year to compare it to, when they had a cattle cycle in 73, they saw the highest what do you call it, cost of cattle, record high prices, similar to what we're seeing right now, and they could still purchase a tractor with fewer calves than we could now. And the price keeps going up and up, and it's really hard to figure out exactly how many calves it would cost to pay for maybe a baler or something, but it's quite a few. So
yeah. Well, and it's it just keeps going up, and so it's something that we all obviously have to keep an eye on, and I think that's a great metric. When I was having a conversation with my neighbor the other day about what it cost to buy a new pickup when he started versus what it costs to buy now, and and how many calves he had to sell to buy that new pickup, versus how many he would have to sell now to buy that new pickup. And I think we came up with something like twice as many calves it would take to buy that new pickup, which is, I think you're right around 3 times as many calves to buy the baler. So compared to then.
And
so.
there is something to be said about that, because the pickups and the tractors and the balers today are twice as good as they were in the 70s.
I just drove my son's 1981 Ford F-150 to the church today for this, to my office today. And
Nice.
Definitely. It doesn't compare to our 2019 Ford F-350.
Yeah, for sure. So there is some quality factors that go into there, but it's hard to, I don't know.
But you can't buy a more plain vehicle than my 2019 Ford F-350.
Right.
It was second from the bottom. It's an XLT, so it's not an XL. But you can't and balers. Okay, you can get one without net wrap, right, or whatever. I don't even know if you can get one without net wrap anymore. But I mean, you can buy. It's hard to buy less fancy baler. You definitely can't buy one that's as simple as they were in the 1970s,
Right. Nor would you want to, really, because it just it kills so many other pieces of efficiency that we've grown accustomed to. So yeah.
Yep.
But I think the next thing that I talk about here on over-equipped farms, I think that's a bigger killer than even our skyrocketing equipment costs. And I've been thinking about this a lot, and so I had a little fun. I ran around the research farm here. We're on 1,100 acres. We have about 350 head of cows here on the research farm, and we do make quite a bit of hay. Or I don't say I do. The farm manager makes quite a bit of hay, and so I ran around and I took a bunch of pictures. I said, okay, what on the farm has anything to do with producing a hay? And I ran around the farm taking pictures of all of the pieces of equipment. And then I got back in the office and I started putting it all together, and I realized, holy cow, we have a lot of stuff laying around. And then I thought back to the farm I grew up on in Idaho, and I realized, this is right in line with about the amount of equipment that we had in Idaho to make hay. Here on the research farm, we have 2 swathers, one works and one doesn't very good anyways. We have 3 balers, one works and the other 2 don't. We have 2 rakes, one side delivery rake and the other one's one of the brand new, and we get good deals. I guess we get good deals from John Deere or something like that. And so we have a lot of brand new equipment here on the farm. And then we also have a small baler. A lot of guys that make hay also have one of those kicking around somewhere, and it maybe halfway works. And that's the way ours is. We have 3 hay trailers. We have half a dozen tractors. One tractor, its only job is for hauling hay. And then we have a pickup that if we weren't hauling hay, we wouldn't have to have such a large pickup. And so when you start looking at all these things, it's not just that we have one tractor, one swather, one rake, one baler, and one bale hauling trailer. If you think about any farm around the country, they're going to have a lot more equipment that is just kind of legacy built in that is also there. And so that's one part of it. The other part is that the national average beef cow herd is 46 cows, right? In Missouri, it's 45 cows. And in my home state of Idaho, it's 73 cows. The interesting thing is that those herd sizes aren't large enough to support a haymaking operation in its entirety. The issue is that a lot of these small operations that are around this average and maybe even up to 100 cows or 200 cows, they can't justify the hay making equipment, but they still have it. And that's a big killer because they're over equipped. They have way more hay making stuff than they need. And even just having one, even just having one round baler is more than what they need, to get the job done. And they're not using it to its fullest capacity. So that's something that you really have to, get around, the over-equipped farm side of things. So.
Yeah, for sure. And, the number of acres that you're running that equipment over, starts to make it more or less profitable or more or less justifiable, I suppose would be a better word for it. And so when you're only making a few acres of hay for, 45 to 73 cows or whatever it is, then it becomes even less justifiable to have some of those things around, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right.
And there's, with all of this, there's opportunity cost. This point of over-equipped farms, if you sold that equipment, you could use that money to do something else.
Yeah.
Hay making takes time is point number 3. Same thing. The time that you are not spending making hay, you could be doing something else. And I think those are both really important things to think about. Different ways of thinking, starting to think differently about how we're using resources, money, capital, because capital is money and the things you buy with it to produce something. And how are we using capital? What's the opportunity cost of how we're using the capital? What's the opportunity cost of how we're using our time? And what else could we be doing with it? So talk a little bit about that time perspective.
And that one's a funny one to me. Because some farmers don't value their time at all, and others say, "Oh, I would never work a job that pays $20 an hour. That's not enough." But they'll run out and they'll do a $15 or $20 an hour job making hay. When you could be doing a lot of things, there's a lot of things that you could be doing with that time that are far more worthy of your time as a manager. And so. Identifying what those things are. Is it marketing? Is it trying to find cheaper prices on the stuff that you need for your operation? Some of those things that actually make you a lot more money than just, sitting on the tractor.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, you're figuring out. Yeah. That is huge.
Yep.
I really appreciated some of what you called attention to in the Working Ranch radio show. What we're best at is growing beef. So spend more of your time doing what you're best at and less of your time on those things that you feel like are necessary to be able to do what you're best at, where you could probably find somebody else who's doing it at scale, who can afford to do it cheaper. And especially in your neighborhood, it's a huge advantage where you've got so much, I think, probably decent quality hay that is very affordable. Is that accurate? Am I understanding that right?
Yeah, and that's a point later on in and of itself, the oversupply of hay that we have at the moment really across the nation.
Let's take a quick break and hear a word from our sponsor today, Understanding Ag. Are rising input costs keeping you up at night? At Understanding Ag, they help producers like you save money and build resilience through regenerative agriculture. Their team of experienced farmers and ranchers will show you how to reduce reliance on costly fertilizers, pesticides, and feed by working with nature, not against it. With proven regenerative practices, you can improve soil health, boost water retention, and increase your land's productivity while cutting expenses. From grazing plans to cover cropping to full system redesigns, they tailor solutions to your land and your goals. Let them help you make the transition from input-intensive, conventional to profit-enhancing regenerative agriculture. Visit understandingag.com and take the first step toward a more profitable and sustainable future. Well, and it leads us into that next point, right? The variable forage quality that we face. We face this year, a lot of hay struggled to get put up without getting rained on in every neighborhood that I'm aware of. I'm sure there's exceptions, of course, but at least from me east, for sure, it was hard to put up hay without it getting rained on, and that impacts forage quality and some of those things, right?
Yeah, and I often like to call attention to that sinking feeling that you have when you lay some hay down. And Clay, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but we certainly did on our farm at home. We make some hay or lay some hay on the ground, and then 3 days later, it's getting dry. 3 days later, it rains on it, and then you're out of the field for 3 more days, and after that 3 more days, it rains again. And about the 14th day of that stuff laying on the ground, it really makes you sick, and there's nothing you can do about it. And the further east you go in the country, the more that happens. I would say that the chances of that happening where I grew up in Idaho are pretty rare, but the chances of that happening here in Missouri are pretty common, especially with our chance for pop-up showers that you don't even you can't predict, you can't expect them. The weather predictions out here are so variable during the summertime that it's really hard to manage a good hay crop.
And not to mention the fact that, as you call attention to in your article, you can 100% control the quality of the hay you purchase, right?
Yeah. And that's very much true. You can completely, because you can go and you can do soil tests. You can have a soil test done, or you can require the person that you're purchasing hay from to supply a soil test, which is quite common also. And, or sorry, not a soil test, a hay test.
Mm-hmm.
And then you know exactly what's in the bale, and you can physically inspect the bale, and you can say, okay, these look good, I can purchase these. And it's what, and we can get into this a little later on, but when you go from making hay to purchasing hay, I think that there's a lot of things that we that are kind of misconceptions about the purchasing end. If you've never purchased hay before, sometimes it's hard to know how to properly purchase hay. But I'd say there's a few tricks that you can use to make that more effective, really. So.
Yeah, certainly. What are some of those things? What are some of the things that people should pay attention to if they're thinking about buying hay?
Yeah, the number one thing, and this may catch you off guard, I'd say the number one thing that you should do is, one, find someone that is really good at making hay. And then when you go to pick up the hay, give them a good check that's cashable, and give them a smile and a handshake. And that person is going to remember you because you're a rare beast, and they will, and next year when you show up to buy hay, they're going to put you first in line.
Mm-hmm.
Growing up, we were in the hay business. We didn't have as many cattle as we had hay acres in Idaho, and the people who always came with money, and we liked the green cash better, but the people who came with money, they were the people that we supported through a drought. If there was a shortage of hay in the neighborhood, the people who got hay first were the people who paid us on time and gave us good checks. They were always the ones who got hay first, and they always got the best quality hay. And, hay producers love people like that. So I would say develop that relationship and always send them a good check, and your hay quality will be lots better. I know
right.
It sounds pretty elementary, but I think it's sometimes a thing that people miss out on. I don't know, in the beef cattle industry.
You're right. That did catch me off guard. That seems like a pretty simple place to start.
Right. And And if you've ever been in the haymaking business, you would know how big of an issue this is.
That's crazy.
So that's the one thing. And if you get a consistent hay producer, then they will just love you. They will just love you if you consistently purchase from them. And they will take care of you. They're running a business as well, and if you treat them well, then they'll treat you well. And then the next thing is, order a hay test so you know exactly what you're getting. Send in a forage quality analysis, and that'll give you a good starting point, and it'll help you know exactly what you have for your winter supplementation. Over time, you may not need it, but especially at the beginning when you're first purchasing hay, it's really useful to have so you kind of have that peace of mind of knowing that you're making a good purchase. Another thing is that sometimes you shouldn't take people's word for how much their hay weighs, because cattle farmers and haymakers are very similar to each other in that they misestimate the size of their animals, and they misestimate how heavy their bales are. And so it's a good idea to actually weigh the bales, so that you know how heavy they are, because oftentimes farmers will overestimate the weight of their bales by 100, 200 pounds.
Which is the opposite of what most people do with their cows.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. So when you if a farmer says, "Hey, I have a 1,200 pound cow," then okay, just add a couple 100 pounds to that, right, and that's what she is. And the opposite is true with
you have a 1,200 pound bale, it's a 1,000 pound bale.
Yeah, exactly. So
that's funny.
So keep that in mind as well. And if you're dealing with a straight up, a pretty honest hay guy, then you may not have some of these issues.
Yep.
Another thing, so there's a lot of other things here.
No, that's fine. That's good.
Another thing, when you're purchasing hay, look for those deals where somebody has some barn kept hay, and it's the spring of the next year, so it's 1 year old hay, and they're trying to get rid of it so that they can put the next crop in. Those are always good buys, and the hay does not deteriorate that much inside the barn. And so that's always that oftentimes that's a really good deal, especially if you have another good place to store it when it comes onto your farm. That can make a huge difference in the costs of purchasing the hay. For example, like this year in Missouri, you could buy year-old hay that was probably ended up being better quality, because our hay quality this year was horrible. And it maintains its hay quality over time pretty well, if it's put up properly. And so you could purchase, and I saw advertisements on Facebook for hay bales that were barn kept and they're year old, for like $10 to $20 a bale for a big round bale. That's cheap. That we're talking, $40 a ton. And that was the same way. I bought a bunch of small bales for my wife's horses this year, and they were kept in the barn, and it's year-old hay, and I bought that hay for $2 a bale for small square bales, and it was great hay. So that's another thing that you can look for, especially in the springtime when they're trying to get their new crop in.
Yeah, that's good. Those are practical helps. I appreciate that. Probably number 5 on your list is one of my favorites, that haying removes nutrients. I live on a old hay field, and we're trying to regenerate it, and you can see the years of industrial scale nutrient exportation there. And so always hauling off, never putting back, and definitely not putting back in the same level that it's hauled away. So, but you've got some really good numbers here in the article about kind of what a ton of fescue hay will remove in terms of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Talk a little bit about that.
Right. So in a fescue bale, and this is going to vary depending on whether you have alfalfa, your alfalfa hay is going to have more nitrogen in it and more phosphorus, about the same amount of potassium. But in a fescue bale, you've got about 32 pounds of nitrogen, 12 pounds of phosphorus, and 45 pounds of potassium. And plus a whole bunch of micronutrients as well, like calcium. There's quite a bit of calcium in hay, magnesium, all of those things, boron. They're all in there. And when you're making hay and exporting it out of the field, all of that nutrients is going with the bale. And to add insult to injury, and this is part of one of the other points, is that you're not priming the biological pump in that soil through adding carbon to the cycle. And so the bugs have nothing to eat to cycle more nutrients out of the mineral fractions of the soil to give you to replenish those nutrients. And so it's this cycle of degradation over years and years, and that can be a killer. And if you're in Missouri, you can tell what people aren't watching their nutrients on their hayfield, because they'll get stuff like broom sedge coming in, and that's just that's just those years of degradation. It brings the weeds. So yeah, it's a pretty vicious cycle, really. But it reminds us that haying is an export market, and for those of you, maybe you know, maybe you don't, but a lot of the hay that's produced in Idaho, Washington, Oregon, and California, a lot of that hay gets shipped overseas to places like Saudi Arabia, Japan. And what's happening in those countries, Saudi Arabia is importing water through hay because they don't have any water. Japan is importing land because they don't have any land. And so those are the imports that they're bringing in, and that's what we're exporting to those countries. When you purchase hay from your neighbor, you sell hay to your neighbor, you're exporting stuff as well. You're exporting your ability to do mechanic work. You're exporting your ability, your land resource, and you're exporting your nutrients. And it'd be a shame if you didn't put a real price on what that is costing you as far as all of those things are concerned. So the number that I come up with for fescue hay is about $72 a ton. So I often argue with that if you're not selling your hay for at least the cost of the nutrients, then you're shooting yourself in the foot. You just as well spread it back out on your hay pasture.
Yeah. And one of the things that you said, that the average hay crop is 4 tons to the acre. So that's $288 per acre that you are removing in nutrients every time, right?
Sure. Yeah. And, in Missouri, that average hay crop, especially on fescue pasture, is going to be a lot less. We say 2 to 3 tons per acre. But yeah, as the further you get into alfalfa country, the closer you get to 4, maybe 5. But yeah, and alfalfa exports more nutrients than a grass hay would.
Yeah, and it's different, of course, everywhere, right? Many of the people in my neighborhood will make hay down to half a bale to the acre, and those are probably more like 1,100, 1,000 to 1,100 pound bales. So we're talking 500 pounds to the acre, which is a quarter of a ton. So it's just different. But like this year, I think most people are 1 to 2 bales to the acre. So
for sure, that hurts from the equipment side. And now that you've brought it up and it's on my mind, I think I need to say it. But it doesn't matter how much. Let me rephrase this. Yeah, it doesn't matter how much hay you produce, that your costs won't change on that acre. So if it costs you $50 to harvest 4 tons of hay, let's say you have a cutting and you get 4 tons out of it, your cost to harvest that hay is going to be the same as if you harvest half a ton.
Mm-hmm.
Because your costs are involved in the time of traveling over the field and the diesel required there. You can go a mite bit faster, but not much. And so right now the costs for going over the field with all of the haying equipment is around $75 per acre. When I first started in forage agronomy in 2017, it was $50 an acre. That was the benchmark. That's how much it costs you just to run all the equipment and your labor through the field. And so if you are producing less hay than what the value of that time is and the equipment, then you just as well leave the equipment parked in the shed.
So just time, equipment costs, labor costs, equipment costs, and nutrient costs, we're at $150 a ton almost.
Yeah, sure.
And then we need to, if we wanted to have profit, right, as you so well brought out, profit is what is in excess of costs and labor and all those things, right? So then you got to sell it for more than that to have profitable hay.
Yeah. Yeah, and typically when we're using an enterprise budget, we would not look at the value of the nutrients in that because it's almost implied. But you are going to look at your cost of your equipment, and you are going to look at the cost of your land. If you own the land, then you need to be paying yourself rent on the land. And you can work with any number of accountants, and they can help you with that partial budget analysis. And I would highly recommend doing that because you'll be able to figure out if you're actually making money on it. Yeah.
Sure. The next thing you've got on the list is profitable alternatives. Again, really appreciate this one because I've said for a long time, I think most, maybe all ranches would make more money if they sold the hay equipment and grazed custom grazing stalkers, or you did custom grazing or ran their own stalkers on the land that they usually hayed.
Right. And so if we dive a little deeper into that, let's say that you just decided you're going to kick the hay habit cold turkey, sold all your equipment. And I mean all of your equipment. Really what you would only keep back is maybe one tractor so you can feed in the winter. Maybe not even that. Here in Missouri, you could probably get away with a bale unroller, just depending on what your context is. But selling all that equipment, and then what could you do with that extra money? Well, I mean, you could build some infrastructure so that you can put cattle on those acres if it's not already there. And then you'd have a little money that you could, maybe buy some stalkers, or you could find, you could call the sale barn and find somebody that you could custom graze for. The opportunities are endless for those profitable alternatives. And this is one of the ones that, in doing some research here at the research farm in Linnaeus that I've found, basically through my own research. I have a research project, and it's funded by the Fertilizer Control Board of Missouri, and we're trying to figure out the best nitrogen rate for, at least, they're trying to figure out the best nitrogen rate for haying compared to grazing. And in good forage systems research center fashion, I decided that we're going to rotationally graze those grazed acres, or management intensive grazing on those grazed acres and hay the other. And so this year we had a really great hay crop because it rained so much. And then on top of that, I grazed a bunch of heifer stalkers that we have laying around, and basically we would run them through the plots, whenever I saw that it was time to graze. What we found through that research, at least and this is in its first year, but and we have not made our last grazing pass of the year. We're done haying. We're completely done haying. We haven't down our last grazing pass. And right now, as it sits, the haying enterprise is set up to lose anywhere from $50 to $200 an acre, depending on what the nitrogen rate was, and we stand to profit anywhere from I think it's $100 to $200 an acre on those heifer stalkers, and so there's some value right there. I mean, we could have purchased in a bunch of heifers or steers or whatever, go to sell by marketing school and figure out how to buy animals right and put weight on them and graze them for the first half of the year when you would have been haying, and then send them down the road. And you're going to make a profit on that if you manage all of that correctly. Same with hay. If you manage it correctly, you might make a profit. But there's a lot more margin, especially right now in the beef industry, where you can make more money if you just simply quit haying and started doing some other enterprise on that hay field.
Just to make sure I understand you correctly, you could park the hay equipment in a good hay year and make between $150 and $250 more per acre doing that by grazing. Then you wouldn't even have to sell the hay equipment to do that. You're just leaving it parked. Is that accurate?
Yeah. Well, so in this analysis, we're not. Yeah. We're accounting for the depreciation costs on the equipment only on the haying enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would say if you're trying to apply this as a producer, then you would be selling the equipment because it's super expensive just to park equipment and let it sit there.
Yeah.
So you would be selling the equipment and use the money that you receive from the equipment to build the infrastructure and start grazing.
Right. But even if you didn't sell the equipment, you are still more. I mean, are those numbers right? Or I know the depreciation comes into it, but is that, you think that's accurate to say that it the way I did?
Maybe. I think it would depend. You really would have to do. You'd have to do your own math on that and figure out what your depreciation scale is.
Sure. Okay.
And figure out how much you're losing by just letting it sit. But equipment is pretty expendable. They're like cattle. You can take them to the market and sell them and buy a new set next year, if you decided this wasn't the right route. But yeah, there are certain years, certain times when you would be more profitable, just park it and go to grazing. But you would have to do the math on that and figure out for your operation what that would take.
Next one on the list is labor shortages, which, when McDonald's is paying $15 an hour plus a $500 signing bonus or whatever, it's driving that market up as far as the labor market. And they're doing that in places where there isn't necessarily a high minimum wage, but they're still doing it just to compete in the labor market. So that's part of what we're competing with too, right?
Yeah, and on this one, I often, I often hear the old timers say you can't find good help nowadays, and they don't want to work. And really, I have a couple young people that were born after 2000 working for me right now, and they're fantastic. They're great help, but I have to pay them. They're not going to work for nothing, and you're going to see that. The youngster in your neighborhood that's just a really hard worker. Everybody wants him, and he knows how much he's worth, and so he makes a lot of money. and so you have to realize that if you want good help to work for you, you're going to have to pay them because they know their value. And if they could go work for the welder and make more than what you're paying them, then they're going to do it. It's just a supply and demand thing, really, and so you need to be real about that, realistic in their value. I often compare a tractor driver to a heavy equipment operator. They're the same thing, and if you need a tractor driver, you better be willing to pay him what your county is paying their road grader, because that's what he's worth.
Well, and it's easy to have a $10,000 mistake in a tractor. So, yeah, you can pay that guy $10 an hour to run the tractor, but it doesn't take very long for that to become way more costly than $10 an hour.
Right. You certainly don't want Elmer Fudd driving your tractor. You want somebody that's sharp.
Right. Yep. Thank God we've had good hay years, or at least this year was a good hay year in our neighborhood. And it sounds like you've had a few good ones in your neighborhood. And so there comes those times when there is going to be more hay. Like we were out in Minnesota here a couple weeks ago, and I turned out that we weren't going to be pulling anything home on our trailer. And so I was like, well, I'll hop on Craigslist, see if there's any cheap Minnesota hay. Turns out there wasn't, so we brought home an empty trailer. But, I figured with good productive years, there might be some hay available that was cheaper than what I could buy at home, which there wasn't. So I didn't spend the extra fuel to haul it home. But it is one of the things that happens frequently, and usually within hauling distance, you can find hay that's, coming from an area where there's more of it than they need.
Right. And so what we're seeing across the country right now is there is a lot more hay produced, oversupply of hay, compared to how many animals we have, and that's twofold. We've had some really good yields this year. The winter last year wasn't as bad as as it could have been, and also the cattle numbers are way down. And all of those things added together makes it so that there's more hay and there's not very many people to purchase it, and that just drives the hay down. I think haying is one of the better markets to be in, I guess, because it's completely driven off supply and demand. There's no futures in the hay market. It's not a commodity, and so it rides the roller coaster a lot more than a lot of the other commodities would. So yeah, there is that oversupply of hay in this year, and I would say that if you wanted to get started in not making your own hay, this would be the year to do it for a lot of people across the country, because hay is so cheap. Even my parents in Idaho, they're purchasing hay for less than they normally do. And so it makes it a really good opportunity if you're thinking about getting out of the business. Then get while the getting's good, really.
Yeah, for sure. And another top one on the list for me was the soil degradation issue that you bring up for point number 9, and expand on that a little bit.
Right. So we already talked about carbon priming the soil microbes inside the soil, and this is something that every soil scientist learns in their soil fertility class at college. Some of us forget it, but most of us learned it in college, or at least we were told it, because that's what the books teach. That there are microbes inside the soil, and carbon is their energy source. And if we are not returning carbon to the soil, those bugs, those soil microbes don't have anything to eat, and so there will become less of them. And those soil microbes are the ones that are mineralizing nutrients inside the soil. They're helping the plant grow. They're improving aggregation, just a whole number of things. And so by removing all of the above ground biomass, you're not only removing all of that stuff that you could be adding to the surface of the soil, but also the roots shrink as well. And so you're not getting this robust root system that you might have if you were not in a situation where you're moving the totality of the above ground biomass. And so it really hurts, that it really hurts the soil in that regard. Also, you're driving very heavy pieces of equipment over the soil and you're compacting it, and that adds another layer of soil degradation where you're having soil compaction, and that's causing a lot of issues. It causes infiltration issues. It causes their I guess air to soil ratio issues, and so all of those are problems that you would face, in a common hay making enterprise.
You talk about mineralization. When we have healthier soil, we grow healthier forage, and animals need less of it to get by, right? And I mean, that's even can be true in hay crops. If you have a more nutrient-dense hay test, then you can use it, and I meant to say this earlier, you can use it as supplementation rather than substitution. It can become something that you use as a supplement, a cheap supplement, cheaper than a tub or something, and you can use it as a supplement rather than, we're giving them everything. We're substituting their feed, what they would graze or what they would find on their own. We're bringing it to them as a substitute.
Yeah, and as like so many other people have said, the more pieces of equipment that you put between a cow and her food source, the more expensive it will be.
Right.
So, yeah. Also, I listen to your podcast all the time, which is why I reached out to you, because I was like, man, it'd be cool, and I have something interesting to talk about this time. And so, anyway, so I've probably listened to all of your episodes, which is horrible of me, but I do drive a lot, and so I spend a lot of time. It's the
benefit of living in the middle of nowhere. You got a lot of time to listen to stuff.
Yeah, but Dallas Mount was on a couple of weeks ago, episode 462,
mm-hmm.
and he said some really great things in there about and I couldn't agree with him more on the amount of diversity that you have inside your business, and what that does to your profitability, where he was explaining that, the business with 2 or 3 enterprises are the ones that are most successful. And he cited the Western guys that have cattle and a haymaking operation. And I think that's such an important point to point out, that oftentimes you have too many enterprises. And I would say in Missouri, specifically, that, those enterprises, even on a traditional farm, are, you have your cow-calf enterprise, and then they have a stocker enterprise, and they have a haymaking enterprise. And oftentimes, a lot of them will have a heifer. Most everybody has a heifer retention enterprise that feeds their cow-calf enterprise. And then they have a bull enterprise because they're running registered stock or something like that. And those things add up a lot. And so my intention here is, okay, let's look at this enterprise, the haymaking enterprise, and is that your most profitable enterprise? If not, let's move it off the books.
Certainly.
So.
Yeah. And there are a whole list of other things, other ways that we can do what we think we're accomplishing with haymaking, right? There's other cheap winter feeding strategies. That's your final point on this list anyways, of what we could do instead, right?
Right. And this is going to vary depending on where you are in the country, but I would remind people that you can still stockpile and graze big blue stem, little blue stem Indian grass. You'll have to supplement protein on those. But even in that situation, you can still use those as stockpile. Missouri, we're at I would say we're in the best situation for grazing stockpile tall fescue. It is a miracle plant in the wintertime. It grows aggressively in the fall compared to pretty much all other grasses. And it makes it a really great opportunity for cheap forage. But there are some other options as well. And maybe this is something that you could do to replace a hay acre, right? You had a guy on episode 370, Harry Cope, and I don't know. I oftentimes, I know Harry personally, and so when I listened to that podcast, I was disappointed in how not excited you got about milo grazing. But in our part of the country, that's a really great way to replace your hay acre and put milo in it. And yeah, go back and listen to Harry Cope because he's a wealth of knowledge. But when we run the cost this year, when I run the costs on how much it costs to make to feed hay versus stockpiled fescue versus milo grazing. To feed hay this year, it's going to cost you about $1.10 a day per cow. To graze stockpile fescue this year is going to be around 65 cents per head per day. And then to graze milo, it's going to cost around 45 cents per head per day. And it may even be lower because we had such a good rain year and our yields are so high. And so look at all of those options. Look at milo. Milo's such a fantastic forage during the wintertime. And it's so easy to manage it, out of all of the ways that you could graze, it is the easiest one to figure out how much to allocate. And cattle can get fat on it through the wintertime. So there are some fantastic options. I'm working with other stuff like sorghum sudan grass, stockpiling sorghum sudan grass. That's another option. So think out of the box a little bit because there are ways to feed cattle for much cheaper than feeding them hay.
On top of that, to try and up my excitement about grazing milo, is that there's the opportunity if you have a great year. And hey, we've got more grazing days here than we have cows personally. There's probably somebody who's looking for some place to go with their cows in the winter, and you could bring them in on a custom basis and make some money that way. And tends, when you're custom feeding in the winter, it tends to be at a higher dollar per head per day than it is during the summer, at least in my experience.
Yeah, for sure. So, and I've thought of that as a potential side hustle. To rent some crop ground and grow milo on it and custom graze for the winter because you can make a lot of money on that. And so that, yeah, there's I don't know, that's a super exciting one that I think of, and there's a lot of benefits to it. I think that you would have to get the custom graze. The person you're doing the custom graze deal with, you'd probably have to get them on board with the idea of grazing milo through the winter. But there's enough data out there now that you could pretty easily convince them, hey, you're probably going to see your fatter cow in the springtime.
Call them this winter and say, hey, or call them next spring and say, hey, this is what I'm talking about. This is what they look like coming off of it. Yeah. Are you in for doing it next year?
Right.
Right. Those are sometimes, like you talked about, developing those relationships earlier. Sometimes that's what it takes. You got to be able to show them what it looks like first, and then they're more willing to entertain it.
Yeah.
So very good. I really appreciate the article. I know we said we were going to do a brief recap, but we didn't really manage that, which is great because you gave us some more context and detail, which I really appreciated.
Yeah, and I hope I inserted a few of the ways that we that we can manage to get away from haymaking.
Sure.
So.
But you did mention that some more things you would have added. What are some of those things? Top of the list of things you would have added.
There's a lot more depth in the soil degradation bit that needs to be covered here because it's something that people are not valuing quite as much. I could talk about water retention. That's one of my favorite things to talk about. If people could classify me as one thing, I'm more of a water agronomist than I am, say, nutrients or something. I've studied water my entire career, and the difficulties that you have in getting water into the soil in a hay operation or retaining water in the soil is huge. And so, yeah, there's a few things like that. I would have really liked to mention some of the ways that if you're in the haying industry and you're not planning to get out, some ways to increase profitability and what that looks like. And really, on that note, it looks like you need to increase your acreage. You need to increase your scale because this is an economy of scale. You need to manage your rotation a little better. So if you're in a cow-calf system and you're haying, don't make one field your hay field, right? Rotate that field around. Do a graze, hay, or a graze, hay, graze, or something like that. That way you're rotating and you're moving those nutrients around. Feed back on your haying acres. That's another thing. You could almost leave the bales in place. If I would have thought of this, because when I wrote all this stuff up, I was thinking specifically of Missouri and not of some of the other areas in the nation. Would have talked a little bit more about how to manage snow. Because we don't really get snow here in Missouri. But I know several producers in Idaho where I grew up that grazed year round. And it just looks a little differently than it does, in other places in the nation. So let's say you're in Idaho, to graze year round, oftentimes, I know a sheep producer, and he was grazing, mountain terrain range during the summertime. And then he was on alfalfa fields during the fall. And then he was out on the desert during the winter. Those sheep never see hay. And that's a really cheap way to do it if you have the ability to move animals around. And I'd say in the West that you really probably need to. There's some other things like swath grazing that are a big deal. And then one thing, and I'm just sitting here thinking about all of these things. Another thing that I really wish I could have mentioned is your ability to manage drought, because that's the number one question that I get. Okay, if I quit making hay, what in the world do I do in a drought? And that's a really tough one for a lot of people to wrap their minds around. And so there's a lot of context that goes into it. So it really depends on your situation, what you should do. But I would say that first of all, you're going to have a more drought resilient farm if you aren't making hay, because your soil is going to improve over time. And beyond that, you're also going to have more stockpile pasture because you're increasing your number of grazable acres. If you include all of your hay acres as grazable acres as well, and then also during a drought, you have to monitor your forage supply. You have to learn how to graze and monitor your forage supply so that when you get to the point, so that you don't run out of grass, essentially. You never want to run out of grass. It's like running out of money. And so you need to budget and manage for that. So really what that comes down to is when you get into into late summer, you really need to start watching your grass condition, watch your cow condition. And then, if there's even a hint of drought, then you're moving your disposable animals and the cows that you don't like off. It's a great time to get rid of 81 because she's horrible, and just sell her and be happy about it. And know that don't get that fear of missing out. That's what kills most people, during a drought, is that, I need all these cows so that I can make a profit, because profits are down this year because there's no grass, right? That's kind of the logic, and it's somewhat circular, but really, and there's been a lot of research that has found that the producers that make more money are not stocked at maximum capacity. They're stocked to their winter forage supply, not their summer forage supply. And so working with a flexible stocking system where you have more mouths to feed during the springtime, and then destocking during midsummer so that you have something to graze during the winter, that's kind of your drought management plan. And once you get into the, early fall, and you kind of know how much stockpile you're going to have, figure out how much that is and sell the balance. And oftentimes in most markets, you can buy that cow back in the springtime for about as much as you sold her for that fall. So why carry her?
Yeah, and I mean, so many things there. Understanding ag has been trying to beat into our heads. I think that 90 to 95% of the ranches they consult on are overstocked. Kind of like you said. I've become convinced that if you only ran the cow-calf herd that you could graze through the winter, you would be more profitable, and then bring in, like you said, more mouths in the spring when you've got more forage available. And I think those are just some really helpful and practical things for everybody to consider and think about, right?
Yeah.
I do really want to hear some of the pushback you've gotten, maybe the top 2 or 3 line items in your list of 10 things that generated the most pushback, and kind of how you would respond.
Right. So I think the number one thing is drought. And people get on that like, oh yeah, if I didn't, I guess one comment was, if I didn't make hay during a drought, I would be pulling my hair out trying to find hay to purchase. And this comes back into that first thing that I mentioned about purchasing hay. If you show up with good money in hand every year that you purchase hay, you will be the first on that hay producer's list, and you will have hay during a drought. And part of that is managing so that you're not feeding a ton of hay to make it through a drought. You're just destocking instead. And there's a lot of value there. So that's one of the major things that push back. Another, the funniest one that I've received, the funniest criticism, and people have even personally emailed me this and said, hey, you're just a pencil pusher at the university and you know nothing. And that's fair enough. Because we do have our fair share of those in academia. And so I do think it's funny though. But yeah, I grew up on a farm, and I've learned how this works. And honestly, I've made more bales of hay than a lot of farmers here in Missouri. And so yeah, that's I guess that's more of a personal assault, but whatever.
Yeah, that's a fallacy of logic. Yeah. That most people don't understand. Ad hominem attacks, just because you can attack me personally doesn't mean what I said is not true.
Yeah. And that I think the comments that I've received and have around the country have just been so, I guess, diverse, because some people call me and say, hey, I've been struggling, and it's crazy to me to hear someone call me, midsummer this summer, cow-calf producer, and say I'm struggling, because our conception is that the market's so great that everyone is in a good position right now. That is not true. But just people saying, thank you for putting this out, because I've been struggling and I haven't been able to put my finger on where I'm going wrong, and this is where it's this is what it looks like.
Well, yeah. I mean, most people, I would say, or many people in the cow-calf industry are so far underwater on a bad year that when you have a good year like this, that they're just kind of making it, and so it becomes maybe even more clear when everybody around is kind of dancing in the street, and then you're like, well, why is it just kind of squeaking by? Well, because it's hard when you put all of this equipment on top of that cow for her to carry all that weight, right?
Yeah. And one thing that people are doing that I'm starting to see more and more is it's been such a good year that we are instead of reducing our the amount of equipment that we have, we're upgrading. And that's, you've done plenty of podcasts on it, so I don't need to waste much time on it, but don't upgrade your equipment because things aren't always this good.
Right. Well, and yeah, Governor Larry Roden from South Dakota, I heard him say it personally that ranchers would rather slit their own throat than pay taxes. And, if you're going to saddle yourself with a 5 to 7 to 10 year note on a new piece of equipment just to avoid paying a $10,000 tax bill or whatever it is, yes, they will waste it. Yes, it will be misused. But if you're going to spend $100,000 to avoid paying $10,000, that's not very smart. I'm sorry, I don't know a better way to say that.
Yeah, well, you're just stepping over $1 to pick up 30 cents.
Yep.
That's what you're doing when you try to avoid taxes, and there's a lot of people that said paying taxes means you made money.
Yep.
Be happy about that,
Yep.
I'm certainly happy that my taxes are more right now than they used to be when I was a graduate student, because I'm making a lot more money than I was when I was a graduate student, and you know what? I'm not that big of a fan of all the taxes that I'm paying, but I'm making more money. So sometimes, and Dallas talked about that quite a bit on the last, on that episode. So not too much, go back and listen to that one if you want to know about taxes.
Every time I've had to pay in taxes, I text Dallas Mountain and say, I blame you for this. So
yeah. Yeah.
And he says he's happy to take that. He's happy to receive that. So, but it's a compliment to your business that you are having to pay in taxes. And we'll just totally blow the paradigm up with John Haskell's statement of don't worry about your tax bill until it's 6 figures. So there you go.
Yeah.
When you start having to pay 6 figures in taxes, then you can start figuring out how to manage the burden. But until that point, It's a compliment to your business.
Yeah, don't pay the government more than they deserve, but don't hurt yourself in the process.
Yep.
So
very good. Carson, I agree. We did cover some practical steps. I appreciate what you had to say and how you shared it. Anything else that you wanted to point out here before we let the people go?
Yeah, we could run through maybe a case study of what this would look like on a on a farm, I guess.
Yeah, let's do that.
Let's say you have 50 to 100 cows, and you have 2 tractors, a swather, a rake, and a baler. And you work a town job, and so you're always making hay on the weekends, and and you're thinking, okay, maybe it's a time to get out of this, but you have no idea how. I would say the first step, and this is usually people's last step because they want the security. I would say your first step would be to sell all the equipment and free up the capital, right?
Burn the ships.
Yeah. And I mean, if it all goes bad, then sure, you can get back into the equipment. But if you sell all the equipment and free up that capital, okay? And then what I would do is I would be quite tempted to purchase, and at this point in the year, you'd probably already have enough hay for the winter. But if you didn't, purchase the amount of hay that would make you comfortable, and then go and look at your stocking policy and figure out how many cattle you would need to get rid of to reduce the amount of hay that you're feeding through the winter. And okay, that'll get you through until next spring, right? And then look at that hay acre and think about, and all through the winter you can be scheming on this and calling sale barns to get custom graze animals, whatever you got to do. And and utilize that hay acre. Put in fences. Now that you have the capital because you sold off your equipment, you can afford to maybe build a pond, and put up some fence, and do some of that stuff. Or you could do something like what Harry Cope does, and you could grow a summer annual for stockpile to graze during the winter. Basically, you would just be replacing that hay acre with something like Milo. That'll work across a lot of the areas in the country. The further south you go, the less it would work. But you can get into some other things, further south in the southern United States. Look at your resources there, because there's some things you can do like planting winter annuals and stuff like that. But across most of the northern United States, I would say from the bottom of Missouri up, you could get away with grazing milo or grazing corn on your hay acre. And the typical acre is producing anywhere from 350 to 450 cow days per acre, right? And so do the math on that, figure out how many acres you need, and then put the balance, in pasture. So that could be an option. And yeah, and at that point, you don't have any haying equipment anymore. Midsummer, you have maybe some milo growing if you wanted to do that. You have, your grazing stockers for the summer. And you're not spending all that time, feeding hay or making hay. And at that point, that's when you go, mid-June, I would say mid-June or July is usually when I would recommend buying hay, because if you wait until, December to purchase your hay, then it might get expensive depending on what the drought does. There's a lot less risk when you purchase it early in the season, right? And so build a relationship with someone who's really good at making hay in your neighborhood, and go through the hay test, purchase some hay from them, the amount that would make you feel comfortable getting through the winter. By year 3, you'd probably find that you have a lot of hay sitting in the fence line that you haven't used, because it's really not that hard to stockpile forage. And then, yeah, I mean, at that point, all of that time that you would have spent, making hay, you can be reading books, read some books, read Jim Garish's Kick the Hay Habit. There's a dozen other books that you could read, Dirt to Soil. Just start reading a bunch of books and learn how the pros do it, because there's a lot of people and there's a lot of very profitable farms that are doing it this way. This is not a fringe concept. A lot of the big beef cattle producers, this is the way that they do business.
Most of the big ones have too many cows to feed. Like, they can't feed that many cows everything they need to eat in a day, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, there just aren't enough hours or big enough equipment to feed that many cows, so they have to graze them. And what they get, if they get anything, is supplementation.
Yeah, exactly. Because they're at the scale, 1,000, 2,000 cows, they're no longer in the hobby business, and they're stretched super thin on labor, especially.
Another thing you have time to do is attend one of Ms. Yu's grazing demonstrations or a field day of some kind. Oh yeah, right?
Well, that's something we haven't covered. Great. Yeah. So the University of Missouri, if you live in the state of Missouri, and I think if you live out of sight of the state, you can also attend a University of Missouri grazing school. That course was designed by Jim Garish, and that, if you live in the state of Missouri, go ahead and attend that. In South Dakota, it's the South Dakota Grasslands Coalition, right? If you're in Minnesota and Wisconsin, they have their own thing.
Forage Association or Sustainable Farming Association, I think is Minnesota, maybe.
Yeah. And if you can't do that, go find an Understanding Ag grazing school and attend one of those. there's probably someone in your neck of the wood that's hosting a grazing school, and that's money well spent by attending one of those. And it's funny, in the midsummer, I hosted a field day event this summer, and a lot of people were like, "Why did you do a field day event in the middle of the summer when everybody's making hay?" And I was like, "Well, that's when all of the cool things are happening on the farm." And they're like, "Well, we're too busy making hay." Well, maybe if you weren't making hay, you would have time to attend some of these events, or go visit a farm, go visit a producer that is, not making hay. Look at their operation, see what they're doing. It just frees you up to do a lot more other things to improve yourself, instead of just going through the motions, that you do every year. So,
Yeah. Very good, Carson. I appreciate the case study. Appreciate the practical steps all the way through. So, really, really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much.
yeah, absolutely.
Very good stuff there with Dr. Roberts. Really appreciate his perspective and the ability to get practical about some of the steps and how to actually go about quitting making hay and what to replace it with. So really appreciate him being willing to share that. Coming up next on the Working Cows podcast, we're going to be talking to Brett McCrae of Manitoba, Canada, and we're going to talk to him about how he has been grazing standing corn and some of the ins and outs of that practice and the difference that it has made to his profitability as a winter feed source for grazing standing corn. So look forward to sharing that episode with you, coming your way real soon on another episode of the Working Cows podcast. We'll see you then.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.